welcome back. It's Christine again with the Artist Pod, and today we're going to talk about how to draw an alligator. So, let's get arting. Alright, so here is the alligator. We're just going to get started. And I have it drawn so that it's like he's, in water. His head peeking out. If, I wanted to create the different scales on him, that might take a little longer. I don't feel like you need to as much with alligators like you do necessarily with snakes. So to do his nose here, what I'm doing is I'm drawing some lines down into the recess. The shadows and highlights will kind of take over, but and then I'll have some lines coming straight off of it that are on the opposite side. So there's going to be that gap. And again, because I'm not really focused on the scales, I am on a few spots, but not really dedicated to doing his full body as scales. It doesn't really matter how long I make the strokes. If I were doing the individual scales, the strokes would only, I'd be containing them to within the scale, which can take a while to do. See it more on snakes or other lizards. And I just want to make sure, since he's, in water, that I'm not having sections coming down past, like his nose should be the furthest forward. So if I accidentally have a side area that's too long, it won't read right. I just need to make sure as I'm changing my line direction here that I don't create a weird conflict of lines. And as I'm up to this edge on the eye, right, like I'm doing what I always kind of do at the edge, is I'm looping it. I'm coming in and down, but in a more rounded way. Same thing on the other side. Rounded strokes as we follow that in. Just like we did with the eyes, here I'm looping it again as I come to this edge on the back of his head. Because there's a gap, I can have these lines going in a slightly different direction. Because with gaps, you don't have, you're not trying to connect them together, you can have them indicating that there's a space. So I don't have to worry about line conflict, so I don't have to, I can have them going in a different direction. And in fact, that can help sort of delineate a different space, a different area. I'll make these a little smaller on the right side than I did when I drew them out to match how small these are on the left. And then as I'm doing it, I'm drawing from the tip. It's a little easier to draw from the tip and in. Alright, so I'm going to have the light source coming from over here, like I like to do. And again, as always, what that means is it's coming from above and in front of, not from behind. Not from behind or to the side. So, just also like we did with the cassowary, I'm going to be doing those sort of strokes, right? Like, up, down kind of strokes to give his skin that kind of leathery texture. So that's, up, down, and just sort of clustering them together and spreading them out. And just doing that along the lines I've already drawn. It's nice and easy to do. It fills in a lot of space quickly. Although it takes a little bit of time. It's not as fast as if I were just drawing this flat lines, but it'll give more texture to the finished drawing. The edge of the nose or the mouth here, it's in that little bit of shadow, and then you have it kicking back in as you get to that side of his of his longer nose. There's probably going to be a little bit of shadow on this back side of the nostril here because it humps up, right? So as the light source is coming in, this would be rounded away. Now as we bring it over this way, there's going to be a transition into shadow. There'll be a little bit of shadow here where this particular scale on his nose kind of dips down a bit. Probably won't be big, and we will still kind of be in highlight, but we are going to have to start making that transition. So I'm probably just going to do the rest of it in shadow until I sort out where that transition is. We'll just kind of fade that out. Now we're gonna want the nose on this side to potentially have more of a burst than what's gonna be underneath or behind it. Like here it's in highlight, it creates a good transition, but on this side, not as much. I'm adding shadows right now to the back side of this little hump in his nose, but realistically he's probably going to catch a little bit more highlight, not only on the hump itself, but probably just a few bursts to indicate some differences down where his mouth flattens out just a little bit. Come over a little bit more in the hump and then feather out, and maybe catching, not like that, catching a little bit on this hump. Not a lot because it is in the shadowed side, but just enough to indicate there's another sort of bump there on his face. And down here, very light to get some texture in. And you can see when you back out, it creates sort of a nice bumpy effect. Now as I bring it up, the highlight under his eye, there's probably going to be a little bit of a shadow, which is what I've done here. We'll see how I like it, or if I have the angle right, which I actually think I might bring it over just a little bit more. His eye juts up a little bit, so there would be a shadow. Just have to, you know, sort of line it up in the right spot, especially because, you know, it's on the side of the highlight, so it's going to kick back into highlight pretty quick with his, especially with the contour of his face, right? That jutting back out is going to catch the light. Now I've left this pretty harsh, so I need to feather this out, this transition into shadow. I'm just going to lightly fill in some gaps and just make sure that the bridge over from highlight to shadow makes sense. And avoid any harsh changes. Now coming up to the water on this edge won't be in shadow. It'd be in highlight because there's nothing bulging forward really to stop it, right? Like it's not the edge, it's still an edge that's rounding in a way that the light would be catching it. It's just that the water has stopped it. giving a little bit of burst to his humps here. Create more of an interest, even though it's subtle, because I don't want it in full highlight. It's on the shadowed side, certainly, but it'll create more interest overall. There is going to be some highlight on this bulge here, its angle, before it goes into shadow. Again, I'm just going to give it some extra little pops of definition by adding just a subtle highlight. Nothing major. Alright, and then we have this last little bit. Section back here is, you know, where his head is sort of attaching into the rest of his body. Okay, so, you know, I lightly filled them in first, and now I'm just going to fill in the highlight, which is just going to be kind of on the side of the light source. You're going to have this burst, and it's going to go into shadow on either side and on the tip. Just going to kind of make sure that's sort of feathered out, which is why I do it loosely first, as it's easier to make sure that I'm feathering it out. Same thing on this side. On this side you have the body that would potentially be casting shadow, so you'd have more shadow by the base of it than you would on this side. Now we need his eyes. Alligators have brown eyes, and they have slits. Now, we're going to add some highlights to this. Just like always, the side on the opposite side of the light source, even though it's a slit, it's going to have just that little bit of highlight. I'm going to pull it under just to create the little V, but otherwise it's in shadow all back here. And then on the side of the light source, of course, you're going to have the highlight as well. That goes into shadow right against this edge. And you want to make sure it comes all the way underneath, right? So all of this is in highlight until it comes to the edge. Edge would also be in shadow. But we want to make sure that's feathered out and not a drastic transition, so we'll fill this in. Now we're going to do similar on this side, but I am going to hold back just a little bit. Not too much because we have to make it work, but you know, I don't know how much would really catch the light. Now usually I use the select tool to make sure it's perfectly straight, but the select tool doesn't come down in a nice perfect V, so I'm not going to do that, but I do think I have this one a little higher than this one, so we're going to bring this up just a little bit. And then we have the light flare. And that light flare is one of the most important things to add to an eye. I'm going to do it on the side away from the light source first. Do the foreground color and just fill it in, and then pull it over on this side and do the same thing. Now I may end up making it a little smaller. I'm just going to move it over. And I think this one I am going to make a little smaller, which I'm making it a little bumpy to simulate the dips and bends in his skin. I'm just pulling this one down a little. Need to make sure that I match the same kind of distance on them. I think that works. Little alligator pulling his head up. Could add just a little bit of reflection of the skin in the water. I'm gonna make it a little bit more of a greenish gray. And let's see. If I wanted to add just a little, wouldn't be much. It would be like squiggly, right? Like you'd have this reflection happening in the water around him. Not sure. Sold on it. It adds a nice little subtle burst, but I don't know I really need it. It's going to be brighter on the side that has the highlight. So I'm going to fill this in a bit more. And all I'm really doing for this, right, is I'm making these sort of wide swipes and I'm overlapping them. So it's just these quick sort of squiggles. And I'm not putting a lot of pin pressure because I need to be able to layer this up to create a good, you know, effect. And they don't have to be perfectly straight. In fact, you don't really want them to because of the way that water works. You know, you want just a few dips that potentially go past, but you don't want all of them to do that. That go past the edge. And then a lesser on this side. In the shadow you wouldn't see as much. And then just making sure it goes right up to the edge of his face. Actually, at first I don't know that I liked it so much, but right now I think it's working. As I do the squiggles, you don't want a gap because the water would be kicking in right there, right? So I want to make sure everywhere it's connecting in, there's a clear, like, line where or not a clear line, right? Like it's just sort of running into it. Different texture, certainly. And then, even though I'm not putting a lot of pin pressure, putting less. Sparsing them out and putting less on this side. Just making sure it's following the lines. I wonder, might not like this at all, but I wonder what would happen if I added just a little bit of blue to it. Doing the same thing, same kind of strokes. I don't know that it needs it, right? Like, you certainly get the impression that this is a reflection. I don't know, I do think that kind of maybe adds a lot. Yeah. Because you don't need a lot when you're doing a reflection like this. You do want similar color to your subject so you see it. I think the blue adds a nice other bit of color, otherwise it's almost too green. The blue gives it another little burst here. And then, you don't want to really define form. You want it just kind of blurred out, basically with sort of this extra squiggle for the way the water would be coming up. Alright, so that is how you draw an alligator. I hope that was helpful. In the floating nether next to me, I have other videos of art tutorials I have done, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Take care.